When people think of wartime heat, they picture stoves, fires, or chimneys belching smoke into the cold night. But on the front lines of World War II, a visible fire was often a death sentence. A single wisp of smoke from a trench or a bunker vent could draw artillery fire, mark your position to enemy scouts, or suffocate soldiers trapped underground. Yet somehow thousands of troops managed to stay warm through the most brutal winters of the war without lighting a single visible flame. They did it using what became known as the heat pit, a primitive but incredibly clever underground heating system that kept bunkers dry, warm and concealed. It was silent, smokeless, and built entirely with materials soldiers had on hand. How frontline conditions force soldiers to invent hidden heating methods. By 1942, especially on the Eastern Front, temperatures plunged well below freezing. Soldiers were buried deep in earthen bunkers, sleeping shoulder to shoulder on frozen soil, with condensation dripping from the ceilings and frost forming around the entrance tunnels. Fires were strictly forbidden near the front lines because light and smoke instantly exposed positions. Even if a fire could be started, oxygen levels underground were dangerously low. The problem wasn't just warmth, it was survival. Food froze solid, weapons jammed from the cold, and even basic medical care became impossible in sub-zero temperatures. That's when both Axis and Allied troops began reviving an old concept from the 19th century and adapting it for trench life, the buried heat pit. Quite fascinating how they took something old and made it work under such dire circumstances. The principle was simple but brilliant. Store and radiate heat below the ground instead of burning fuel in open air. Instead of creating smoke, soldiers learned to trap heat underground using earth, rock and controlled airflow to radiate steady warmth through their bunkers. This method was quite ingenious, wouldn't you say? It became one of the most overlooked engineering hacks of the entire war. An impressive feat, really, considering the challenging conditions they faced. So, the heat pit worked on a simple thermal principle, you see. It would capture heat in one chamber and then release it slowly through the surrounding soil and these clever little air ducts. Soldiers would, dig a pit just outside or sometimes beneath their bunker, usually about 2 to 3 feet deep, and then line it with stones or packed clay. A small fire was started inside this pit, but only for a short time, just long enough to heat up the stones and the earth around them. Once the stones were good and hot, the flame was smothered and the pit covered over with an earthen lid, leaving just a small vent or tunnel that led into the bunker. The heated stones would then go on radiating warmth for hours, and those air tunnels acted as natural convection channels, quietly circulating the heat into the bunker without any visible smoke. The key was in the cover design. Soldiers layered soil, ash and damp earth over the pit to trap the heat while concealing any glow. A secondary vent directed what little smoke remained through long underground tunnels that exited dozens of feet away, dispersing the exhaust invisibly into the terrain. To a passing scout or reconnaissance plane, there was no sign of heat or movement, just cold earth. German engineers, in particular, refined this method for use in Erdstellungen, or dug-in positions. Soviet partisans also used similar systems deep in forest hideouts, where any sign of smoke could draw airstrikes. Their heat pits often doubled as cookers. When food needed warming, soldiers buried mess tins above the stones, letting the stored heat warm meals slowly without any open fire. What made the heat pit so revolutionary was its simplicity. It required no metal, no chimney, and no fuel beyond what could be gathered locally. A single firing cycle could keep a small dugout warm for most of the night. The earth acted as both insulation and camouflage, absorbing light, trapping heat, and preventing smoke escape. It was the ultimate stealth heater, low-tech but perfectly adapted for underground warfare. Equally important was its ability to reduce moisture. Underground shelters often became damp and cold because condensation built up from soldiers' breath and body heat. A steady low heat from below the floor kept surfaces dry, reduced frost build-up, and prevented the wooden support beams from rotting. This made bunkers structurally safer and more habitable for longer campaigns. Even after the war, many veterans recalled how their units refined these pits over time. Some added layered rock beds for longer heat retention. Others used salvage metal plates as radiators. In long-term positions, these heat pits evolved into underground thermal batteries that could be reheated daily with minimal smoke or labour. For historians, preppers, and off-grid enthusiasts, the heat pit remains a timeless example of practical wartime engineering that can still serve a real purpose today. Building one is honestly quite straightforward and requires only soil, stones, and a basic understanding of airflow. To recreate it safely, you'll want to dig a pit about 2 feet deep and 3 feet wide, then line it with dry stones. Create a small trench leading into your shelter or tent to carry the warmth inside. Build a second, longer trench leading away from the pit. This acts as your smoke vent. Light a small fire in the pit using dry wood until the stones are fully heated. Then extinguish the flame and cover the pit with a mix of damp soil and ash. Within 15 to 20 minutes, the heat will begin radiating through the ground and air tunnel, providing a long-lasting, low-profile warmth source. In modern use, a well-constructed heat pit can warm a survival shelter or workshop without visible light or significant smoke. It's particularly effective for anyone needing covert heat, whether during wilderness camping, military reenactments, or emergency off-grid living. For added safety, always ensure there's adequate airflow and that no flammable materials touch the heated stones. The World War II heat pit represents a kind of ingenuity that's easy to overlook today. It wasn't designed by engineers in a lab. It was born in the mud, under pressure, by soldiers who couldn't afford to waste a single breath of oxygen or a scrap of fuel. In the middle of one of the coldest, deadliest wars in human history, they found a way to make the earth itself an ally. That principle, using the environment as part of the solution, remains as relevant now as it was in 1943. It's a reminder that survival isn't always about high technology or complex tools. Sometimes it's about understanding how heat moves through stone and soil, how smoke disperses, and how small adjustments can mean the difference between exposure and safety. The Second World War heat pit stands as a silent tribute to that kind of practical intelligence, the sort that wins wars of endurance, not just battles of firepower. For those studying history or, preparing for off-grid living, this forgotten method definitely deserves a place in your knowledge base. It's not just a relic. Honestly, it's a working blueprint for sustainable, concealed heating that costs nothing and could save lives in the right conditions. So, stay tuned to Relic Logic for more lost wartime innovations that still hold value today. Share this guide with anyone who appreciates functional history, and subscribe to keep uncovering the ingenious systems that once kept soldiers alive beneath the frozen ground.